Rod Liddle is here to discuss the introduction of privilege tests at the University of Kent and University of St Andrews. He says asking your children to complete one is the perfect way to deter them from ever wanting to go to university. Now, these universities have been accused of defining white privilege as swearing and wearing second-hand clothes. Surely something you don't see from people of other ethnic minority backgrounds, right? Rod Liddle thinks this is patronising, inaccurate rubbish, and in his column for the Sunday Times, he said this is because it suggests white students should accept personal guilt for their privilege. You can be white and from an underprivileged background just as much as you can originate from Nigeria, and your dad can be worth $500 million. And Rod Liddle joins me now. Rod, these white privilege tests are just an awful thing. And the thing that shocked me so much, about this one at the University of Kent, you have to answer the way they want you to answer or you don't pass. There's no choice here.
Right. Well, that's the worst thing about it, of course. And it's the same at St Andrews. You have to pass it. You have to give the right answer to these tests. You have to accept that you have white guilt. You have to accept your privilege, and you have to admit that if you swear, you will get off lightly because you are white. Whereas if you're black and you swear, you won't get off lightly at all. So the first thing is it's totalitarian, and we shouldn't be doing that to university children. To kids who are going to university, it should be a place of debate and freedom of speech and a chance to hear views which do not necessarily accord with their own. It shouldn't be a place where you are told immediately what you have to believe, especially when what you're being told what to believe is from the utterly discredited, corrosive and divisive critical race theory, which is currently sweeping all of our universities. And, you know, Dan, it gets boring, doesn't it, talking about universities? I would be far, far happier if 75% of our universities became either vocational colleges or just closed altogether so that we had apprenticeships and so on. And too many people are going there. They're coming away with third-rate degrees and promise that they'll get a job, and they pay 30,000 quid for the privilege of not getting a job. We need to rethink the way we do our education. But before then, we have a Conservative government in name. It should do something about this. It should stop this infestation of critical race theory and all the authoritarianism and divisiveness which comes with it.
Well, Kemi Badenoch, the Equalities Minister, had said that it was illegal in schools, but presumably that doesn't apply to universities. But it could, couldn't it? It could, and it should.
It could. Well, it's just a great shame that Kemi wasn't made the Education Secretary. That was a mistake, I think, on behalf of Stan's nipper, because I think she's got it pretty much sewn up and has said a lot of very good things about education, all of which I think most ordinary Conservative Party members would agree with. This though goes beyond it all. It's a horrible way to treat people. It's a kind of double racism because it's patronising to black and ethnic minority people, and of course it's cruel towards white people. And you know, if you're told you're in a position of privilege when you're white and you come from some Sink comprehensive school in Livingston, and you get up to university and you meet, as you say, a Nigerian lad who's been to Eton and whose dad owns up 500 million quid, you begin to question whether you're living in a real world or a fantasy world. And I'm afraid the answer is it's a fantasy world.
And Rod, do you worry that this might actually put off those working class kids?
No, I don't worry about that. No, I don't worry about that. I hope that happens.
Do you think it's a good thing?
I fervently hope. And I would use your excellent programme, Dan, as a platform to say, if any of you guys are out there are 17, 18 years old and you're thinking of going to St Andrews or Kent, don't do it. Don't do it. Get a job as an HGV driver. You'll get 70,000 quid a year. You won't have to pay 30,000 quid, and you won't be subjected to racist claptrap by morons. So that's what I would advise. I'm not worried.
No.
Sorry, go on.
No, I hear you. And Just to return to your previous point, Rod, I understand that it does feel sometimes like we focus too much on what's going on at these universities.
Yeah.
But the problem is, I know that what happens within these universities will soon, within 5 to 10 years, be happening within every workplace in the country if we're not careful.
Well, it already is up to a point.
It's happening at the BBC.
Yeah, well, it's, as you know, it's happened at the BBC, where they've had a particularly, because it's a BBC, fatuous case of it, where it was done in the form of a game, and it was to show that you were miles ahead if you were a white straight male. Which is actually precisely the opposite of where you would be if you were in the BBC and you were black, disabled, and transgendered. You'd probably be the DG by now. So it's also a lie, a downright lie. But corporations have taken this stuff up as well, because everyone is desperate to get on this bandwagon, and it's very, very damaging, and it's very corrosive, and it only makes.
And Rod, I worry as well that our universities could be heading in the direction of US universities. I'm not sure if you saw the clip that went viral last week, Rod, but 2 white students being forcibly removed from a culturally safe area by a group of black students who actively want segregation within the university. And we have to ensure that that sort of madness is not imported to the UK.
We do indeed, you're absolutely right. And in fact, that's been going on for some time in universities, and indeed various concerts in America, and indeed the font of all this rubbish, Canada, where you sometimes get singers who wish to appear woke by saying, I don't want any white people at the front of the stage. I just want no white straight people at the front of the stage. You do get that kind of thing now. And it can only make race relations worse. It can only make them worse.
No, I agree. Well, look, Rod, I'm going to introduce you to our superstar panel. Tonight, it is the author and journalist Rebecca Reed, the conservationist Stanley Johnson, and the commentator and broadcaster Emma Webb. Emma, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, Rod, I wanted to ask you about some, I suppose you would say, speculation about whether or not this sort of phenomenon is religious or has religious characteristics to it. Because obviously one of the aspects of this test is that they're asking for students to agree with opinions in order to be able to matriculate in the first place. Do you think that this is some kind of Puritan secular religion?
It does feel like it, doesn't it? It's very, very, very well put, I think. It has the totalitarian tendencies and the circular feel of a cult, of a religious cult. Because it makes no reference outside that own circle. And obviously, with all this stuff, so many of the things are immediately disprovable when the light of day is shed on. And as soon as you pull at one strand of this rubbish, the whole thing kind of falls apart like a mohair jumper knitted by an idiot. So no, yes, there is something religious about it, something fervid and horrible in that sense. Though it's not obviously inculcating anything decent in these people. It's inculcating division. But yeah, you're right. It does depend, because it can't depend upon reality. It has to depend upon faith. You're right.
Stanley Johnson, what do you make of these white privilege tests?
Well, my question is, who writes these rules? And they can't come down from the authorities of the university themselves. Where have they come from? Have they come from a student union? Who is
this is the university, isn't it, Rod?
No, but what's the authority behind it?
Well, no, Stanley makes a decent point. The university signs up to it. But there are organisations such as, for example, Stonewall, which make an awful lot of money by enforcing various companies to sign up to their charters and to do all this kind of stuff. Where it comes from in the BBC, we know it's from June Sarpong, who has been employed at a cost of £267,000 a year for, I think it's 3 days a week, to sort of diversity in the BBC, or at least all the bits of diversity which none of the diversity stuff that matters, such as being diverse in terms of opinions and class background. She won't get to grips with any of that. So we know where that comes from. Some of it will come from the universities. I mean, come on, Stanley, they are mad as hatters.
Taking your other point, Rod, that your point, too many people go to university. I spent the afternoon, actually, in Brentwood at a brilliant new campus of GBS, and I declare an interest there. GBS is the global banking school, and it is moving rapidly to get a whole lot of people into, as it were, a university framework. They're not giving degrees themselves, but they're preparing people to have degrees from other universities, and they are getting people in who wouldn't otherwise be at university, and I think they are getting practical training there as well. And I think there's a lot to be said. Then you can rule out all the universities and say, far too many children go to university. There's some people who need to go to universities who are not going there at the moment.
No, but the problem is, I think it's about 40 years ago, about 9%, 10% of people went to university. And that was probably just about right. And they studied proper subjects, whereas at the moment, the degrees have become watered down. And it's perpetuating a con upon kids who pay 30,000 quid, think that because they're going to university, they're going to get a good job, emerge from Westminster Uni with a degree in gender studies, and find that their unemployment rate is about 50%. They're not going to get a job. And we need more practical work training for people who don't necessarily excel academically.
I agree with that. I think that makes a very good point. I spent all my life doing Greek and Latin, first at prep school, then at public school, and then at university. I spent 25 years doing Greek and Latin, particularly ancient Greek. When I go to Greece now, I find I can't actually speak modern Greek.
Has that not been useful, Stanley? Being fluent in ancient Greek and Latin hasn't been useful. What?
Rebecca Reed, what's your take? Do you have a different view on these white privilege tests?
I mean, I don't have a different view on the going to university thing because I did a degree in English and drama, which was not worth the paper it was written on. I got a 2-2 to add to the occasion.
But what about these white privilege tests?
But so I have two questions. My first one is a really quick one. I don't know, this is a genuine question. What happens if you don't write the right answers or you decline to take the test?
Pass.
But if you don't pass, what then happens as a result?
You're not allowed to matriculate.
But normal university, like my kind of universities don't really have a matriculation. There's no, that's an Oxbridge thing, no?
Well, St Andrews also have matriculation.
But at the University of Kent, they haven't got matriculation. It's enormously pretentious if they do. So are you just literally not allowed to start classes if you don't take the test?
As far as I'm aware, certainly that's the case at St Andrews.
Okay.
What the case is at Kent, I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, we're fortunate in Kent in that at least one lecturer, the brilliant Ellie Lee, has put her head up above the parapet and said that this is a dreadful thing to have been happening.
Yeah, I mean, even I think that not being allowed to be able to embark on your degree, which presumably at that point you've already paid for, if you don't give the right answers, is a bit ridiculous. My follow-up question is, I sense that you've said before, and I think I really agree, that for me the big privilege indicator is parental wealth and class. That to me is the thing that makes the difference. Because
absolutely.
I went to a very lovely boarding school with lots of girls from Nigeria whose experience of being black in the UK would not be the same as if you grew up on a council estate. That's not to say they didn't experience racism. They did. It was a white village in Sussex. They experienced quite a lot of racism, but it's different. Would you feel the same way if there was a sort of framework to talk about privilege, but it's not about ethnicity, it's about class?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that the class is is the main thing which divides us in this country. And it's what Boris is trying to get to grips with at the moment. I don't know if I believe that he means it, but that's what he says. It is the one thing which really does cause divisions. And the idea that grew up in the 80s that somehow there are white people who oppress everyone else who is this kind of homogenous mass of ethnic minorities. And that ethnic minority is defined by the fact that it's not white and is oppressed, and that they all have these experiences in common is an absurdity. It's an absurdity to say that a Chinese kid at Oxford University has the same feelings of life experience as some kid on the back street of Harlesden who's been selling drugs, I mean, it's just an absurdity.
No, I agree with you, and I think if you look at the educational outcomes for GCSEs, it's something like boys from Chinese families do the best, I think, and boys from traveller backgrounds do the worst. That's the spectrum.
Yeah.
All I would say is that demographically in the UK, your household income is likely to be lower statistically if you are Black British. Overall, so there is a crossover between race and class that maybe we should also be.
But no, I'd reject that as well, because Tony Sill did a very good study into this, which looked at the income differentials and the outcomes for people. And you're right that the Black British was slightly below white British, but it was also below Bangladeshi British and other Asian British. So it was an enormously diverse picture. And you could not possibly look at that and say there is structural racism in this country, simply because plenty of races outperform whites in terms of both educational achievement and indeed income, and some do worse. I mean, it was absolutely spread.
I mean, there is a lot of. I would just say a lot of people, particularly Black commentators, do reject the term BAME for that reason, because lumping together Black British and Black Asian is not useful. Those are two different things.
And Stanley, did you want to have a final word?
Sorry, Stanley.
I want to say that Rod was trying to pin this down on class, and he's probably right. And if you would analyse that a little bit further, you still see that the educational system, the public versus the private, etc., is pretty important in the class thing. Now, to that extent, I would imagine that Rod would be, would applaud when Starmer the other day said, and I'm going to take away the charity status of the private schools, because that's a pretty important factor in this whole conundrum.
But then doesn't that make it worse?
Yes.
But doesn't that make it even worse? Because when I was born, being able to afford to send your child to private school was something that if you were a doctor married to a small town accountant, you could just about do. I will never be able to privately educate my children, even if I wanted to, and I don't earn a ridiculously small amount of money. By making it more and more expensive, you just make a smaller number of really powerful people be able to go. I think stuff like state boarding schools is the answer, more grammar schools.
Okay.
Grammar schools and state boarding schools are a brilliant idea. Absolutely agree with you 100%. I still think that charitable status could be removed simply on the moral issue. They're not charities.
Yep. Rod Liddle, what a fascinating discussion your column sparked. Thank you so much for having it.
Cheers, Dan. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
Rod. And a note here from the University of Kent, where a spokesman said the Respect module was, quote, supporting everyone to ensure all members of our community are treated with dignity and respect. And a spokesman for St Andrews said the modules were introduced in response to clearly expressed student demand. They added, the modules were developed to align with St Andrews' strategic priorities, diversity, inclusion, social responsibility, good academic practice, and zero tolerance for gender-based violence, and help develop skills and awareness valuable to life at university and beyond. Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.